My name's Sean Brown, and this video is going to discuss the benefits of using data mining in research. Data mining can be used to identify patterns in data, and the patterns that you find in the data that you analyse can be used to start an article for a journal publication, or as the focal point of a question for research. Most computational linguistics techniques are preferable to using human intuition because human intuition varies from person to person, while data mining and other computational linguistics techniques are much more reliable and objective. And so in order to test this theory, I decided to get 10 samples of UK English, 10 samples of American English, gather the word frequency for a target word, and then create a rule-based decision tree for that target word, and then test it on the UK and US samples. The words that I did decide to use, colour, centre, spelt C-E-N-T-R-E, and centre spelt C-E-N-T-E-R, I chose them because they are recognisable non-dialect words, and the difference between them is pretty easily identifiable. The results of the data analysis were pretty much as expected. Both the American spellings of centre and the American spellings of colour were obviously more common in American English, while centre spelt C-E-N-T-R-E was the prevalent form of centre in UK English. But there were a few instances of each where English centre has been used in American English and similar results elsewhere. Now I could use the word frequency data of my target words in the US and UK samples that I used to try and formulate a rule to see whether or not it was possible to determine if a text was British or American based on the frequency of my target words. I decided to use frequency over percentage because in a text the British form of centre may appear in an American text and vice versa due to corporations and organisations and so on, and I thought that frequency would be a more reliable indicator. So based on the data that I found, I created 3 rules, and these rules were designed to help me determine whether or not a text was of UK origin or of US origin, and the variables for the rules came from the amount of times that they appeared in the wordless frequency table, approximately. I tested the rule that I made on the UK and US samples that I'd originally gathered the wordless frequency tables from, and I was pretty pleased with the results. They weren't 100% perfect, but they were good enough for me to feel confident enough to proceed and test them with 3 different countries. I chose to analyse English language samples from these 3 countries because they're all speakers of Indo-European languages natively, they're all linked geographically within Europe, and they all share some deep historical ties, so I thought that would be really interesting to see if the UK had a great influence. The table here shows that the US has more influence over spelling in these 3 countries, apart from in the case of Germany, where the spelling of centre is our spelling of centre. There were enough tokens of centre spelt the American style in all 3 countries to assume that, according to the rule, the influence of the US was greater than that of the UK. However, if we apply rule 2, there were enough tokens of centre spelt C-E-N-T-R-E, i.e. the UK style, to assume that the linguistic influence of the UK was greater than that of the US. Differently, if we apply rule 3, the influence of the UK in Denmark and Germany was not as good as the Americans, but there weren't enough tokens in France to assume that the US had more influence. I hadn't predicted the influence of American to be that great in Denmark, France and Germany, because I didn't take into consideration the overwhelming impact of the American media empire in Europe as a whole and across the world. I think it would have been beneficial to my experiment if I'd have used the British spelling of colour in addition to the American spelling. And another way that could improve my experiment would be to tweak the variables of the rules to try and avoid getting contradictory results. This is just one example of using data mining to generate topics of discussion for potential further research using data patterns, such as the influence of the US media on language use in Europe, more specifically, in this case, Denmark, France and Germany.